Welcome to Armchair Expat, the podcast meant to get you out of your lazy boy and into your new life abroad. I'm Shannon Acton, founder of Bargain Homes Abroad, and I'm riding shotgun as we chase the dream of life beyond borders. Each episode, we'll hear stories from people who've left their comfort zone to explore the world. They'll share their highs, their lows, and their in-betweens, all meant to lovingly light a fire under your bum, so you can stop dreaming about it and start living it. So if you're stuck in your comfy recliner, scrolling through dreamy destinations, wondering what if, it's time to swap that raggedy old armchair for a one-way ticket. Let's freaking go, people. On this episode of Armchair Expat, I'm joined by Nicolas Castillo, founder of Rook International CPAs and Advisors. Nicolas grew up in Miami, built his career in international tax, and now lives in Madrid with his wife. After years of working with major firms and corporations, he co-founded Rook International to help U.S. expats and global entrepreneurs with clear, personalized tax advice. In our conversation, Nicolas talks about making the move abroad, adjusting to life in Spain, and the tax mistakes he sees Americans make most often. He also explains the basics of citizenship-based taxation and highlights why countries like France and Italy, yes, you heard that right, can be surprisingly tax-friendly. Whether you're thinking about moving abroad, running a business overseas, or planning for retirement, this episode offers practical advice and personal insights you won't want to miss. And a little disclaimer, please note that the information shared in this episode is intended for general educational purposes only. Tax laws are complex, constantly evolving, and vary based on individual circumstances. Nothing discussed here should be taken as personal tax, financial, or legal advice. Be sure to consult with a qualified professional before making any decisions about your own situation. And with that, here's the interview. Hello, Nick. Welcome to the Armchair Expat podcast.
Hi, Shannon. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just dive right in. Tell us a little bit about your background and upbringing.
Sure. I was born and raised in Miami, where I also started my career in international tax from practically the beginning. I worked for a large CPA firm for quite some time with tax reform, so that was a really interesting time where I learned a lot about the world, the way tax works, the way that Congress passes laws. And eventually I passed on to go into a role with Royal Caribbean, a big publicly traded company. So I was in their internal tax strategy department, working really, really fun stuff with tax treaties around the world. Then, COVID came. That was a difficult time for cruise companies. So I pivoted to a fully remote-based tax firm that served expat individuals. And that was when I really got the opportunity to move abroad and spend time there full time, which was about 3.5 years ago. So 3.5 years ago, my wife and I, we moved to Spain, settled in Madrid, and we've been there ever since. With the big major change being last year, we opened a Rook International CPAs and Advisors, a firm that specializes in the tax planning and tax compliance for Americans and business owners abroad.
Did you always have a dream to move abroad, or did circumstances presented themselves and it was too good to pass up?
Yeah, it was pretty much always a dream. And it always just felt like a dream. It wasn't anything else until, COVID revolutionized remote work, and I realized that it really was a possibility. And, my wife and I took a leap of faith, and that's it. We did it.
How long from the time you were thinking about it to making it a reality?
I think there was about 3 years where we were in Miami just talking about, what ways can we get to Spain and get a good job that we can, live and support ourselves there and the lifestyle. So I would say about 3 years before we actually did make the jump.
And what was it always Spain, and why?
Yeah. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was always Spain. It was, so being from Miami and Hispanic background, we speak Spanish, and so that's the first, foot in the door because that's just easy. Um, my family, my parents are Cuban, and the Cuban Spanish culture is very similar. And so when my wife and I traveled for the first time there, we fell in love with the culture, with the food, with all the sights because Spain is so diverse from the north to the south to the east to the west. And we actually also chose to get married in Spain. And so we had our destination wedding there. Um, and, it was just Spain's the ideal place for us.
Yeah, I felt like home right away.
Yeah.
So how did you go about deciding so you landed in Madrid, were there other options, and how did you go about deciding where exactly you wanted to be in Spain?
The original idea was to spend a year in Madrid, maybe a little bit more to, settle and find, okay, what other places would we like to live, explore it a little bit. But Madrid is awesome. Madrid has a great food scene. It's so connected to the rest of Europe, so you could take a flight in a couple hours, be in plenty of other major cities of the world. Um, and we haven't gotten bored yet. So maybe when we do, we'll find a smaller town to put our roots down.
Yeah. How has your daily life changed from Miami to Madrid?
Yeah, I think one of the huge differences is driving. Driving culture, everything is 20-30 minute drive away in Miami. So you have to, drive to the grocery store, traffic, all that fun stuff. Um, in Madrid, what I love the most is the walking and the public transit. I need to go pick up, dry cleaning. I need to go pick up dinner. All that is within 5-10 minute walk, and it's feels healthier. Instead of being so sedentary. I think that's the biggest change from moving to Europe in general.
How long did
Right.
that take you to really get used to?
I think we were just forced into it.
Mm.
We started off, I think, Ubering a lot because we just couldn't figure out how to tell what subway line took you to the right place. Um, but over time, I think you feel it, and you ask people around you, and they tell you, "Oh yeah, this app works. This app is totally inaccurate." And little by little, you'll get there. So I would say within 3 months, we were walking and metroing everywhere.
And how do you say the cost of living compares? Madrid's a pretty big city, and I would imagine it's pretty cosmopolitan and rather expensive, similar to Barcelona. Um,
Yes.
is it comparable to Miami, or did you find that you actually adjusted downwards in your cost of living when you moved?
Yeah, I think the costs have adjusted way downwards.
Mm.
Food I think is the major difference, especially groceries, because in Madrid it's very easy to find very fresh produce for very low cost because Spain is very agricultural focused, right? So um, fresh tomatoes, fresh broccoli, onions, garlic, all of that for under $1 per unit, so or euro, under a euro per unit. So it's pretty incredible how much your dollar can go in groceries. If you're eating out every day, that could add up and it could feel pretty comparable to life in the U.S. and in Miami. Although there's a lot of people that go way above and beyond with their spending in Miami, and I'll consider those outliers.
Yeah. So, what would you say is the most rewarding part of uprooting your life and transitioning it to Spain with your wife?
I think the most rewarding part is that it feels like a very wholesome life. Being able to walk everywhere. There's a great sense of community. The food, it feels very very healthy, um, and the people don't live their life to work. You go out for a walk at 5 p.m. and everybody's already on the terraces, under the umbrellas, having a drink, even if it's 95, 100 degrees out. So I think it feels very, very wholesome being in Spain.
How have you found community? I mean, like you said before, you grew up speaking Spanish and have that Hispanic background. So I assume, the language transition was very easy. That's the easy part of you. But how did you find kind of a community once you got to Madrid?
Yeah, I think, there's always going to be a challenge because the imposter syndrome of I'm not Spanish. So even though I speak Spanish, I'm not Spanish. So there will be people who do not bring you into the fold because of that. And it's natural, I think, going anywhere. I think a few of my friends that are also expats in different cities have shared this kind of feeling. Um, but what I've done is kind of take interests, hobbies, take classes for painting, or I took some Spanish classes or cooking classes, and you can meet people with similar interests, maybe from similar backgrounds, and that's how you can make friends. That's how you can socialize and get that personal connection that is lacking when you work remote.
Did you struggle at all with that, or did you kind of just fit right in, you
No,
think?
it's definitely a struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Compared to Miami or just in general?
I think just in general, because it is tough to be. You feel like an island a lot of the times when you're out there. You move to a new city just without any friends already, but it can be done. There's plenty of groups. There's especially in a metropolitan city like Madrid. There's plenty of people from different backgrounds that will bring you into the fold. But it just takes some patience and some courage too.
Did you get relocated with the company, or was it an international company that hired you on, or how did that kind of facilitate the move for you?
Yeah, so it was a totally remote company. It was location agnostic. Um, and by being so, I knew I wanted to focus with European clients. So by moving to Spain, it would help me with the time zone. And so I had to do a lot of the relocation stuff on my own and with, help from lawyers like anyone else that would do this as a total independent freelancer.
Do you have any recommendations for someone kind of doing a similar thing, as far as like working with relocation experts or attorneys, kind of going through the visa process? Like, how did you find it, and what do you recommend for other people?
Yeah, so, the online searching, it's very much imperfect. So I have a large list of the immigration attorneys that I've contacted for help and that I've heard other people contact for help and are very happy with.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about taxes because that's your area of expertise.
Yeah.
What I don't even know where to start, honestly. What what are the most common mistakes, I guess, that you see with Americans specifically who are looking to move abroad? Or
Yeah, so the biggest mistake that I see with people moving anywhere outside of the US is they think, hey, I've been outside of the US, I don't have to file a tax return anymore because I'm not living there. Why should I? Um, and that's really big mistake. And it's really easy to think that because we as Americans are the only country that has citizenship-based taxation. There's one really small country that does it too, but in the practical world, there's really just the Americans that have to deal with this sort of dual filing nature and
Mhm.
potential for double taxation.
So when
Uh,
you say citizen-based taxation, can you kind of explain what that means?
sure. So let's say you are a US citizen, you have a passport, or you're a green card holder, even, and you don't live in the US, you still have to file a tax return. And potentially you're liable for US tax. So you have to meet an exception in order to not pay tax rather than that just being the rule. And that's really a matter of your citizenship, not where you live. Most other countries have residence-based taxation where you have to live in that country for X amount of time before you pay taxes there.
So I'm moving to, let's say it's Spain, and I always have to file an American tax return. But there's also there's treaties, right, with dual taxation. Can you kind of walk us through what that would look like for the typical client, and then we can do outliers as well?
Sure. So for the typical client living anywhere outside of the world, there's really two provisions of the US tax code that prevent double taxation. And I highlight these first because the tax treaty is, let's call it, it's an emergency. It's more of a rarity because the two provisions that exist in our tax code are enough for 99% of the population
Okay.
to satisfy that double taxation. I say sometimes it's the tax treaty is like using a jackhammer where a screwdriver is enough. Um, so the first provision is the foreign tax credit, where effectively, if you are paying taxes in another country on income that you're earning in that other country, then you don't have to pay it again in the US. So, just to make up some numbers, you're paying a 25% tax in France, and your US tax on that income would have been 19%. Then US tax rate is lower, you don't pay again to the US, you only pay to France. If it's the reverse, let's say your US tax rate is 25 and the French is 20, then you would pay France 20 and the US that 5% difference.
Okay.
So you're not paying twice, you're not adding up both tax rates. You're really paying in globally the highest rate, but it's a matter of who gets paid first is the trick that we deal with. Um,
Are there situations where US gets paid first, or is it always pretty much wherever you're a resident, the country you're a resident in gets paid first?
Most of the time, it's the country
Okay.
where you are resident.
Okay.
And so that's going to be, you know, majority of the time. And then there are cases where the US does get its tax first. And that's usually dictated by the tax treaty with each country. So, for example, you live in France and you have a rental property in the US, that is usually taxed in the US, and then there's a credit in France.
Is there a difference between retirement versus working for yourself or having your own business versus being employed?
There is because a lot of the tax treaties that do help dictate which country gets tax first, or which country gets to tax that income first, that depends on the country itself. So, for example, France is very, very generous with retirement income and allows you to pay tax or not pay tax on your US 401ks, your Roth IRAs, your traditional IRAs. You get to maintain all that US tax benefit, while France, they let you keep that. Versus Spain, Spain wants to tax everything about your retirement. And so,
Interesting. Okay.
depending on which country you choose and let's call it your assets, your profile, uh, there could be major tax differences for two different people.
So so then let's take the other scenario where if someone is looking to or has their own business or is looking to start their own business, what are the most friendly countries for that in Europe?
The two friendliest countries that I've worked with that I think are really underappreciated are Italy and France.
Mhm. Okay.
So France is very complicated, but they have a lot of incentives. Or let me say it like this: France has a bad rep for having very high taxes, but if you follow the rules and you do it correctly, there's a lot of benefits to setting up your business there. Italy, on the other hand, is trying to bring a lot of people into the country, a lot of working people to, for a lot of economic reasons, and so they have tremendous uh, tax incentives, even 15% flat rate, depending on your situation, when you're a business owner. So there's some really good work to be done if you're considering France or Italy as an option.
What are the main countries that you specifically deal with in
Yeah,
your
I work mostly with Spain, Portugal, France, and Italy by nature of where I'm positioned and the local teams that I've been acquainted with. But I see the UK, I see Germany, um, I see the Czech Republic, and even Australia a good amount.
Okay. Does it differ by country how many days you spend there, which makes you a resident, or like how does that work?
Yes. So generally, if you think as a rule of thumb, 183 days in that country makes you a tax resident, you'll most of the time be on track. But it can be more complicated than that because if you are in the country for fewer days, but you establish residency through a particular type of visa. So in Spain, one of the visas does create a residency, and you have to start paying tax from that date on. Um, Italy, once you register in their call it their social registry, then your tax residency begins. So there are some nuances in each country, but generally 6 months or more.
There's a lot of misinformation out there. Can you kind of walk me through the most common myths about taxation as an American living abroad, and kind of set us all straight?
Yeah. So one of the big ones, again, it's about the whether you file or not. And it has to do with this threshold, this magic number of $120,000, $130,000, where people say, "Oh, I make under that. I don't have to file." And the truth is that with that number does mean something, but it's not related to whether you file. It's actually related to that other provision called the foreign earned income exclusion. And that says that if you are working from abroad and you are there, let's call it 11 months out of a 12-month period, then you can exclude up to $130,000 in 2026 of, of your earned income from tax. So, sure, maybe if you earn less than that, you won't have to pay tax, but you still
Hmm.
have to file it. Um, and so that's one of the most common things I hear out there related to expats. One of the things that is really tricky is, if you have a non-US mutual fund or call it ETF or the equivalent, then that has a huge reporting and tax consequence in the US. It's considered a whole company on its own. You have to file this really nasty form that
Mm.
it's no fun to do. And the other important one is banking. So if you have a bank account at one of the non-US banks, you might have to file an FBAR. And the FBAR it stands for the Foreign Bank Account Report. Basically, if you're telling the IRS that you are an American that has assets, that has cash outside of the country, and they are trying to basically track for money laundering and illegal activity. But this forces everybody to report their assets to the IRS, and the penalties for failure to do so are pretty severe.
Mm. And is that once a year? Does it go with your normal tax forms, or how does that work?
Yeah, most providers will do it all together. Although technically it goes instead of to the Internal Revenue Service, it goes to the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. So it
Ooh, that
sounds
sounds
scary,
scary.
right? But it really is it's a declaration of the information. It's not a tax. Doesn't matter if you report $10 million or $1 million or $10,000. It's just saying that it exists. And that's the really important part here.
Okay. Okay, my brain is spinning right now. Let's talk a little bit about filing in the country that you're living in, wherever you're a resident. Let's just use Spain, for example.
Sure.
Is that different than the typical filings in the US, where we all know that standardized is April 15th and that's once a year? Is it different in foreign countries, deadlines, and how many times a year you file? How does that work?
Yeah, so for the most part, it is very much the same. There's a once a year filing that happens usually May, June, at least in Western Europe. That's the filing time. And so that's generally the report of all your income that you had worldwide, the calculation of what you had paid in as estimates, what was withheld on your paycheck if you were an employee, and then here's the final number, make that payment. It's very similar to our US process. Now, every country will have a different set of filings for everything else that happens. So, for example, Spain will have their equivalent of the FBAR, and they'll ask you to report all of your assets outside of Spain. So, you have a US bank account, a US brokerage account, a US IRA. You have to disclose all of that to Spain. And that's one of the many ways that they track, hey, that account went way down. Did you take a distribution? Report that to us. And that's how that's the purpose of these forms is to understand what's going on in your financial life.
Mhm. Yeah, because it can get very complicated very fast. So let's just say I work remotely for a company that allows me to work anywhere in the world. That and they collect the taxes automatically, or they withhold funds. Are they responsible, the company responsible for paying, I guess, paying the taxes to the country of your residency, or do you have to figure that out? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, that's something that you would have to figure out on your own.
Okay.
So the company, the U.S. company, they're withholding taxes. That's for the U.S. and that's
Yeah.
satisfying U.S. obligations. They will not have obligations to the foreign company, the foreign government.
Right.
Um, so it would be up to the employee, the contractor to make sure that they're working with a local accountant to say, this is what I'm expecting for the year. This is, the expenses I'm going to have, the deductions. And then that local advisor is able to say, okay, these are the estimated payments you should be making. These are the amounts. And so it's definitely becomes a two-pronged world where you have to deal with the paying to the US and you have to deal with paying to the foreign country,
Okay.
which generally, if we're speaking about Western Europe, high tax countries, the I usually recommend that we taper off the US payments and we stop doing that because usually the foreign tax will offset the US tax. Otherwise, if we are withholding in the US and we're making estimates in Spain or wherever else, then we are making double tax payments. And that will get rectified later, but it's going to be a cash flow issue and it hurts.
Gotcha. Okay. So someone who either owns their own business or is a consultant or freelancer, do you recommend they continue to run that out of the United States after moving, or transfer it over to whatever country they're living in? Or does that depend upon the country?
It depends a lot on the country, but generally I would recommend that the having a US base for your contractor is a good idea.
Okay.
So to explain what that means a little bit, if you're in France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, generally all of them are similar in this sense where you can have your US banking, your US LLC, your US contracts, because all those things are familiar to us. And if we're working with American clients, then it's familiar to them as well, which is important. And then secondary to that, perhaps we register in the country. Spain has a freelancer regime. France has a freelancer regime. Italy has a really good freelancer regime. And then we have some way of declaring that income in the local country with a tax benefit. And
Okay.
so it's almost like we have everything operationally is happening in the US, but the tax is covered in locally and you're registered locally as a freelancer, as a contractor.
Okay. Okay. So what if, and you mentioned if your clients are US based, what if you're working with multi international clients on a 1099 or even just a small freelance basis, but they happen to be in, the UK or in the EU? Does that change things, or is it because they're paying you and it's going into an American bank account? It's different.
So still in that case, I would say having a US base makes sense because of everything else that you have to do, it works.
Hmm.
Um, I would maybe add on to what I said previously that, a bank like Wise, a payment processor that accepts payments from different currencies, all of that would have to be added to the mix to really make it a viable structure for a cross-border business.
What about the 7% tax in Italy? Can you speak a little bit to that? Because it gets really confusing. I mean, I know, and is that only for retirement income?
Yes. So
Okay.
that is a tricky one because it sounds really great and they're really trying to reel you in with it, but it really is a lot stricter than it might seem. So it does only work in certain cities in southern Italy with a population below 20,000. And it is only on retirement income. So you cannot move to, southern Italy and start a business or, take a huge dividend from your own business and expect it to take the 7% because they'll see right through that.
Okay. Got it. What about in situations where someone, let's just say, a married couple or partners move abroad, one is retired and the other one still has a business or some kind of freelance work? How does that work? Do you recommend they do separately, or cuz especially when it comes to getting residency and visa, the retirement you may qualify for, but one other person's work, can you even do that? I guess is my question.
Yeah, actually, it's pretty common. I had a conversation the other day where it just was, it made a lot of sense for one spouse to be retired, take the 7% regime, and the other one was working. So, he got another regime that was for people who work. And that works really well in Europe because most couples have to file separately.
Oh, I
So
didn't know
there's
that. Okay, say more about that.
Yeah, so in the US, we have the concept of married filing jointly, which gives you a tax benefit for doing that. In most other countries, it's it's a non-existent idea. And so every spouse files independently, and that creates some opportunities even that contradicts the US concept of filing jointly, and it's always better to file jointly. So it varies case by case.
What are a few smart things people can do prior to moving abroad and in preparation for tax planning?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to do is to understand what your sources of income are, what your wealth is. So, in Spain and France, there's a wealth tax. So if you are above a certain amount of wealth in properties, in retirement accounts, etc., then you can have an additional tax, the wealth tax, to pay. Um, that's something to at least understand, and so you're not surprised. And then potentially there's ways to plan around it. Um, Same thing with just in general how your income is taxed, because that 7% rule, if you don't know about it and you don't move to one of those 7% eligible cities first, then you lose it. You lose it
Mm.
for good. And so there's a lot that can be done if you plan and you speak with a cross-border professional in advance. Um, Even something as simple as Do I keep my house? Do I sell it? Do I rent it? That question, the answer changes significantly based on which country you decide to live in.
Wow. Okay. So, needless to say, someone should hire a tax advisor prior to moving at all, or at least do a consultation to see kind of what your options are and weigh them.
Yeah, absolutely. And tax advisors are not only there to file your tax return, they do a lot more than just that.
Yeah, and it's better to pay the money up front and not have some big mistake or faux pas that's going to cost you more in the long run, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So you deal mostly with people and individuals who have their own business.
Mhm.
So can you give some scenarios of what that looks like and how you help those individuals?
Sure. So let's say you are, you're moving, you have no preference or no strong preference over Italy, France, or Spain. And you tell me that your business is profiting over $100,000, and your spouse also works in the business, and um, you also have 401ks, retirement assets of over $2 million. That whole picture gives us a lot of pros and cons for each country. So wealth tax wise in Spain, depending on where you live, Barcelona in Catalonia has a really low threshold for the wealth tax, and so this couple could be subject to it, and that's a could be 2% on their wealth that is subject to tax, and that hurts. Um, that business, it could do really well if they are living in Italy and taking advantage of this 15% regime, which actually more like 11%, um, on their compensation. So that profit they're going to pay themselves, so that compensation is going to be taxed at a low rate in Italy.
Mhm. Mm.
Pretty fair. Versus if they wanted to reinvest more of the money, they wanted to make sure that they had that money for next year, for hiring, for buying assets. Then France and Italy have a pretty similar situation there. And so, independent of the preference, the language you speak, and which culture you really want to be in, there is a very clear winner in all of these situations of which country is best. I say we get surprised a lot because we say a lot that France is usually the winner.
Interesting. Yeah, like you said earlier, France gets a bad rap, right? And it sounds like there's some really good, especially either retirement or if you have your own business. France is kind of really friendly for Americans.
Yes, yes, it definitely is.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think a lot more people are going to be looking towards France, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah. Spain is hard because if you're a high earner or you have high wealth, then there's generally high tax rates. Um, Portugal is very similar, although they don't have so much of a wealth tax issue. Um, Italy is pretty good for earners, and France is just generally good for everybody.
Okay. And you mentioned in your kind of scenario, Barcelona had a really low threshold. Is that Spain in general, or does it depend on where you actually establish your residency within Spain?
It depends on where you establish your residency within Spain, because they
Wow.
have
Okay,
their
so that could
own.
change any depending on where you're looking to live.
Yes, significantly. Because
Interesting.
Spain has its own, call it like a state system. Their autonomous regions, they call it, have their own ability to set tax rules and tax thresholds. And so Barcelona being in one direction, they have a higher a higher tax burden effectively, whereas Madrid, the province, and Andalusia, the south, where you see Marbella and Sevilla, those regions are generally very conservative and have a higher threshold. So most people there don't pay wealth tax.
And okay, I didn't realize that, I guess, but it makes sense. If you're looking at the United States, you also have state income tax in, 40 of the states or whatever it is. So that would be similar to what we're used to.
Exactly. Exactly. So it
Okay.
feels like home.
Exactly. So given all of this, like, I know Spain because the language and you love the culture, but like looking back, would you make any changes in the move when you're kind of thinking about it?
Professionally, I always want to say yes, of course.
Mm,
Italy probably would have been a great situation for us starting up. France too. I mean, France is great, but personally, Spain's where it's at.
yeah, it doesn't matter. It's not a tax issue. It's where your heart is, right?
Yeah, and at the end of the day, that's what I say, that I'm gonna tell you what I think because of this, but if you speak Italian, you really love the food and the culture there, do it. You know,
Yeah.
same with Portugal, same um with Spain or anywhere. Just that's my point of view, and that's what I can share.
So, what if somebody is looking and making these decisions? Like, tell me the specific individuals that you work with at Rook.
Yeah, so specifically, we have a lot of people retiring and trying to decide where to retire. That's a big one. We have a lot of people who are running let's call it a freelance operation, making just under six figures, maybe a little over. And, how do we make a structure that's not overly complicated that also saves them money? Because, you get to do a few more tricks when you're in the close to 200,000 range, right? Or higher. And then we have a lot of companies that do, you know, buying, selling into the US, out of the US. And it's just a matter of what, which countries are the right countries for me to set up myself, my business, and my activities for the best global structure.
Okay. And what would you leave anyone who's listening to this podcast? What would you leave them with as far as advice, whether it's on taxes or just in general moving abroad?
Yeah, I think the biggest message I would have for people is that there's a lot of confusing information out there, a lot of conflicting information out there, and it's really important to just talk to people that you can trust or that maybe someone has worked with, so that you're getting the right answers. It doesn't hurt to get a second opinion or a third opinion because it's really easy to fall into the wrong path, and then that has huge implications for years to come. So um, I think getting that information, getting that education early on is well worth it.
And where can everyone find you if they want to get in touch?
So I am very active on LinkedIn, which is it's one place to start. But my website is what I'd say the best place. We try to put out some really uh, helpful and thoughtful information in the blog to to just educate people, and then through there you have my email, and we can have a call and see how we can help you.
Great. And that all that information will be in the show notes. So check the show notes as well. Thank you so much for coming and answering your questions and sharing your story. I think this will be helpful to a lot of people. It'll probably raise a lot more questions. And
I'm
hopefully
sure,
they'll reach
and
out
I
to you. And
apologize in advance.
there's always going to be questions. There's always so many individual scenarios and situations, but I think this is a good general layout of kind of what you should be thinking about prior to moving abroad. And before making that leap, really educate yourself as much as you can and seek professional help if you can as well. All right, well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Well, Shannon, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. And that's it for today's episode. Thanks for listening and spending some time with us. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Make sure to follow the show and leave a review. It will really help others find us. And if you're dreaming about a life abroad or already living it, I'd love to hear from you. You can connect with me on Instagram at bargainhomesabroad or on our website, www.bargainhomesabroad.co. Until next time, keep exploring, keep dreaming, and I'll see you back in the armchair soon. Bye-bye.